Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Wallsend history story. This week is another in the series of Wallsend Tales from the Past, and this is video number 20. As with all of the other previous videos, the stories may be about people, places, buildings, or just things that went on in the past in the Wallsend area. The stories are all from various different years and are not in any particular order, and some of the stories may be longer than others. I do hope that you will enjoy it and find it interesting. But before I start this first story, I do want to say that sadly there are no real old photos that I can share with you of the schools in the story due to copyright issues, so I will mostly share the area where they used to be, and the one picture that I do have is just of the church rather than the school, but that, it's close as I can get. And I do feel like I am waffling on a little bit more than usual at the start of this video, so do forgive me, as I really just wanted to say that before I started. In May of 1888, the foundation stone for the new Sunday schools connected to the United Methodist Free Church was laid in front of a large crowd of people. No mention was made of who had laid the stone, which is a shame, as it's always nice to know that. There was a brief description of the schools, and it said, there would be a main hall which would be 57 feet by 30 feet, and there would be 3 classrooms, one large one and 2 smaller ones, and also cloakrooms and Bible and book closets. At the back of the school there would be a ladies' meeting room, a secretary's room, and a room dedicated for tea making. It always amazes me just how important tea was back in the 1800s, so much so that it needed a room of its own. Outside there would be outhouses, which I kind of took to mean outside toilets, but of course I could be wrong about that. Underneath the building there would be a chamber used for heating purposes. However, the article doesn't actually go into great detail as to how that worked. The whole building would have a strip of land running around it, and there would be an outer wall around the whole building. The main hall would have seating for around 372 people, and the classrooms could be adapted to create an area for a further 64 seats. The school was to be built with red brick, and in places there would be bands of deeper red bricks, creating a very simple pattern. The design was said to be Gothic, and it was said that when it was completed, it would give a pleasant but plain appearance. The front entrances would be facing on to Buddle Street. Now, although it was said to be a rather plain building, and parts of it sounded much more elaborate, with a large window with buttresses on either side that would be higher than the roof, and the photos that I have seen of it showing it as something that looks quite a lot like a chapel, it really isn't quite as plain as the article makes out. There would be a small stone placed in one of the walls that would be inscribed with the words, United Methodist Free Church Sunday Schools, erected 1888. The estimated cost for the building was £955, which doesn't really seem all that much, but this would actually be around £156,000 today. The architect was Mr. T.E. Davison of South Shields, and the builder was Haswell and Waugh of Gateshead. The Sunday school opened its doors in September of 1888, and part of the service included a tea meeting, which brings me back to my earlier comment about how important tea was in the early 1800s and the late 1800s. Sadly, similar to the earlier about the stone laying, this article also doesn't say who had performed the opening ceremony. However, a public meeting in connection with the school was held in the evening, and Alderman Green of North Shields was in charge of this. The whole opening day was said to have been a great success. So I do wonder as well how many people listening to this story actually went to the Sunday schools. Do please let me know in the comments below. In 1879, Dr. Aitchison had been given details to the Wallsend board about the health of the people of Wallsend. He said he had visited Long Row in Wallsend, which we now know as Carville Road, and although he said the ash pits were clean, the backyards were full of things like chickens and other rubbish and not kept very well. It seems he had decided to send what was known as the Inspector of Nuisances to the houses to inspect the condition, and it would possibly result in the chickens and anything else being kept in the yard being removed. Dr. Aitchison also discussed the recent cases of typhoid fever. He said there had only been 2 recent cases. One was a lady by the name of Mrs. Mines, and the doctor said he had visited her and told her that it would help if she opened her windows, but she had refused to do this as she said that would mean that her husband would catch cold. Now that kind of reminded me of my nana years ago telling me not to go outside for too long because it was chilly and I'd catch cold, and this often had me saying to her, "But nana, a cold is a virus and you can't catch it because you are in a cold atmosphere." It seems Dr. Aitchison had this same view, and Mrs. Mines wasn't taking any notice, and he said that she simply wasn't helping herself or her husband. Another case was a child who he didn't name, but said they had caught it from their parents, who also refused to open the windows. Hopefully both of these patients did recover well. Dr. Aitchison had also visited houses in Benton Way, Denham Terrace and Buddle Street, and he said they were mostly clean, but again had lots of poultry and the likes living in their yards. Now, I must admit that I had not realised that people kept chickens in their backyards. I'd always assumed that they were kept on allotments which were in abundance in the 1800s. So imagine stepping outside of your back door to find half a dozen chickens wandering about. I think we can easily see the mess the yards would be in and why it worried Dr. Aitchison so much. And I do wonder if he sent the nuisance inspector to these houses as well. This little story is one I missed when I was doing video number 19 and was discussing the hospital on the Green. It relates to the day when the King and Queen were going to visit the hospital in February of 1939. Mr. Dowson said that the Swan Hunters Shipyard Brass Band had been invited to play on the day of their visit. He said the Borough Council had invited them to play and they had written to say it was a great honour and they would be happy to accept the invitation, and they would be positioned somewhere in the grounds of the hospital. Now, I know that it is a long time ago now, but I did wonder if anyone listening knows of any of the band members who played for the King and Queen that day. Also in 1939, the job of gardener for the whole grounds was advertised. Now, you might think this was something very simple that would not cause any issues, but trust me, it wasn't. Mr. Briggs, the chairman of the Ratepayers Association, said he could not understand why the town council had advertised the job to people outside of Wallsend. He said Wallsend had some wonderful gardeners and they were all very capable of working in the whole grounds, and surely one of them should have got the job. He said he knew that there had been 36 applicants for the job, but he didn't think that many of them had been from Wallsend, and the man who had been appointed to the job was from the northeast, but not from Wallsend. However, at this point it was stated that the council felt best to advertise further afield, as they believed there would have been many problems had a Wallsend man applied and been related, however distantly, to one of the councillors. They would then have been accused of favouritism. What Mr. Briggs thought of this is unknown, as the paper did not print his reply, but I somehow think he would have thought it was a bit of a silly excuse. When I first saw this article from 1938, I thought it was actually about 4 babies being born, as the headline was, "Quads are born at Wallsend make history." However, it turns out the story was actually about 2 swans, Jerry and Jakey II, who were the first ever swans to give birth to cygnets in Wallsend Park, and the article said all babies were doing well. They had made their first appearance on the lake just a day or so before the article appeared in the papers. The park keeper, Mr. Martin, thought that one of the babies might eventually be moved to the Hall grounds and the others would be given to other parks in the area. It was said that for 3 years the people of Wallsend had been watching and waiting for the couple to have babies, and they were now quite a visitor attraction, and it was hoped that the 4 babies would soon be given names. The parent swans had a little bit of history to them as well. It seems that the female, Jerry, had been involved in an accident near Willington Gut. She had crashed into some wires and had broken a wing. She was a wild swan, and a good Samaritan had rescued her and taken her to the park on a tram. I have to admit that did make me laugh, as I can just imagine the looks of the other passengers at the time. Her name had come from the person who had rescued her, and she had clearly made a good recovery. The male swan, Jakey II, had been a gift from the Gateshead Parks Committee, and the pair had been in Wallsend Park for 4 years. I wonder whatever did happen to those 4 baby swans. I do hope they did all survive and go on to have babies of their own. And I don't remember swans in the park or the Hall grounds myself. I am sure I've said this before, but the photo on screen that you can see at the moment does show some of my family feeding the swans on the park lake. And just to end this week, I hope you will remember me telling you the tale of the swan, Jakey I, in a previous video. This was the swan that often wandered out of Wallsend Park and wandered around the town, on the high street and other roads, and was at first thought to be a male, hence the name Jake, and then turned out to be a female, hence becoming Jakey. She had sadly never found a mate or had any babies, and the article said after 25 years in the park, when she had died, adults and children alike had been very upset at her loss. I do hope that you have found these short little stories about life in the past in Wallsend interesting, and I do hope that you have also enjoyed them. As I often say, these are just little glimpses into some of the more simple and everyday things that went on, things that often don't get talked about or remembered. But I think that they are things that are also nice to know about, and I hope that you agree with me about that one too. I do thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again very soon.